Welcome to the Middle Tennessee Sierra Club Native Plants in the Landscape and the Life They Support program. Our presenter tonight is Richard Hitt. He will briefly discuss a few major studies that sounded the alarm on the recent and predicted decrease in biodiversity. He will discuss why we should plant more native species and how much of our landscape should be devoted to natives. The benefit of using native plants will be illustrated with examples from his own suburban landscape in Franklin, Tennessee. So here's our agenda for tonight. Just a brief housekeeping tips. Tonight's program is about an hour long. This program is recorded and will be available on the Sierra Club Middle Tennessee site. All mics need to be turned off during the presentation. We try to post all the links that are stated in the presentation on the chat of the Zoom meeting, or if you are listening to this in a recording, the links will be available in the video description. Please put all the questions that you have in the chat. We will pull them up when we get to the Q&A session, the interactive Q&A session with Richard at the end of his presentation. Okay. All right, so let's get started. So let's talk about Sierra Club. Okay, Sierra Club's been around since 1892. We have about 8.5 million members around the country who support and defend everyone's right for a healthy world. Our Middle Tennessee group has over 3,597 members, and it covers these 29 counties in Middle Tennessee. We host group hikes and outings, which unfortunately are on hold this month, but happily will start up again in August. So that's just a month away. We provide environmental education programs like this one, and we work on a variety of conservation issues at the local, statewide, and national levels, and influence legislation and environmental policies. We take an active role in addressing conservation issues in a public forum and encourage others to do the same. So if you want to know more about our Middle Tennessee group, if you want to volunteer with us, we would be very happy to have you. There's so many things to do, especially now that the pandemic is getting better and our activities are starting to ramp up. You can see that there are website links here for, this is the website where we post activities. Here's the Facebook site, so you will see that we try to post as many activities out on the Facebook site too, and we have a Twitter and we have an Instagram site. I will put those in the chat probably around the time that Richard starts his presentation. I can't do both. Okay, County of the Month. So every month we try to concentrate on one county of the 29 counties that make up our group. We thought it would be nice that we all learn about each county. And so this month we're going to talk about Giles County, which is south of Murray County. So if you notice, we're sort of going down a line here. We started with Davidson, then we went into Williamson County, Murray, and Giles is at the far south, close to the Alabama border. It has a population of 29,000 people. It has a population density of 48 people per square mile. So in contrast to that, Davidson County has a population density of 1,000 326 people per square mile. So it shows that it is a very rural community. And let's talk about their creation and a little bit about the towns and the city and some historical events in those areas. One, it was established on November 14th, 1809. It used to be part of Murray County, and then they broke up Murray County into various smaller areas. The Pulaski is its primary city. That's its county seat. Ardmore, Elkton, Minor Hill, and Linville are other towns or cities in the towns, really, in the communities. One of the major historical events is Pulaski is the birthplace of the Ku Klux Klan. It started as somewhat of a benign social event, and it ended up being one of the largest terrorist organizations in the country. So they have tried to change that in that community. So they're moving forward and moving into the 21st century. Let's see, geographically, they are located here, which is south of, it's still part of the southern, it's called the Central or Nashville Basin. So this is the basin, and it sort of wraps around right here. This section right up here is called Elk Ridge, which is, it's called the arm of the Highlands. I suppose this area is considered the Highlands. It has a considerable difference in elevation. I don't know why I can't even say that. But anyway, it's 1,381 feet is the highest point in the county, and 554 feet is the lowest elevation in the county. It's got an entire area of 611 square feet, which is equivalent to 377,000 acres, but it only has 4% of it is water. There are no lakes and dams. There are several creeks. And Richland Creek is really a river. It's defined as a river, but it's just called a creek. And Elk River. Those are the two main waterways. And then we have the long list of additional creeks that are listed on the screen. I'll let you read those. Their primary substrata is limestone. They do have a thin formation of black slate that runs through the substrata. There are 25 caves, and they only have one mine, which is aluminum, calcium, and fluorite that is mined from that one mine. Okay, here's some pictures of the area. This is the city of Pulaski. This is the town of Linville. There's an old Tennessee Southern Railroad bridge. It's called Elk River Bridge over in Elkton. So some beautiful, beautiful landscape. This is a really, really small there's a small population in this community, so I couldn't find, and I looked really hard. I tried to find parks. All the parks I found were very small, so they don't have very large long hiking areas. There's several like state parks over in Lawrenceburg and on the opposite side with Lincoln, but there really aren't that many in Giles County. So Wolf Cap it's a park, but it's really more of a historical place where you can watch people in log cabins, and they have a reenactment of people in the 1800s. There's also Richard Martin Trail, the magazine Road Park, and the Trail of Tears Overlook. All of those are in Pulaski, in the town of Pulaski, so it's not really far out into the country. Okay, so that is the county of the month, Giles County. So let's talk about the presentation for tonight. Native plants in the landscape and the life they support. And our presenter tonight, once again, is Richard Hitt. And let me tell you a little bit about Richard. Richard was born in Washington, D.C. After living there and in Alexandria, Virginia, his family moved to Mobile, Alabama, where Richard attended public schools. He received a flute scholarship at the Florida State University, and he ended up becoming a PhD in mathematics. And in 1977, he joined the faculty for the University of South Alabama, where he enjoyed a 26-year career in the Department of Mathematics and Statistics. At one point, he received approximately $2 million in grants from the National Science Foundation, the U.S. Department of Education, Sun Microsystems, and Morrison Healthcare for research, instrumentation, and education. He received the Teacher of the Year Award for the International Students Association in 1999. He retired from the faculty in 2003. After retiring from academia, he relocated to the Nashville area. Richard resumed his music activities and became a member of the Nashville Philharmonic Flute Assembly from 2009 to 2015. He served as a flute sub for the Nashville Philharmonic Orchestra. And in 2012, Richard, he became certified as a Williamson County Master Gardener and a Williamson County, Tennessee, not Williamson County, but a certified Tennessee naturalist. And he also is a member of the Tennessee Native Plant Society and the Wild Ones Middle Tennessee chapter, where he serves as the founding president. Richard regularly volunteers at Owls Hill Nature Sanctuary in Brentwood, Tennessee, and at the Wild Ones Middle Tennessee chapter. So welcome, everyone. Welcome, Richard Hitt.
Well, thank you very much. That was a more than adequate introduction. Shall I share screen? Okay, does everybody see a screen?
We see it.
Great, okay. Well, first, just as a shout out to Giles County, that's where Dwayne Estes grew up, the executive director of the Southeastern Grasslands Initiative. And it's the home of the only occurrence of Porter's goldenrod in the state of Tennessee. It's an endangered species, and SGI and the Wild Ones chapter did a joint rescue down there to thin out some of the overgrowth so the sun could get down to the Porter's goldenrod.
Good to know. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, as we mentioned, I did get the PhD. It was useful while I was teaching, but since I've moved to Nashville and become a naturalist, I don't need it very more, so it just kind of faded away. With that in mind, if you want to talk math, I'm an expert, but everything else, I'm just a hobbyist, so not an expert on that. I am a member of the Middle Tennessee Wild Ones chapter, so I thought I'd just mention a few things about it. Wild Ones is a national nonprofit that promotes, really its only reason for existence is to promote the use of native plants, and that's what we do all the time. The Sierra Club is much more general, involved in a lot more important activities other than native plants, but we focus just on the native plants and sustainable landscaping practices. The motto of the organization is healing the earth 1 yard at a time. Unlike the Sierra Club, we have a total of 5,000 members in about 17 states, and we have about 60 chapters located around mostly the eastern United States. The local chapter has its own website with events on it, and the national site has more general information, like information about starting native plant gardens. So I invite you to check any of that out that you're interested in. So I thought I would just start pointing out that Tennessee has an abundance of native plant species. According to the Flora of Tennessee book, there are 2,878 total vascular plants. That would include everything from the ferns on up. But 15% of those are not native, so of course 85% are native. So we've already lost a bit of biodiversity because those naturalized plants are not really contributing very much to the ecosystem, whereas the native plants evolved with all the local animals and have already established relationships with them. As it is in most states in the United States, the aster family is the largest family, and then below that it kind of varies quite a bit. But a lot of people are surprised to know that we have 53 species of orchid in the state. No one of those is very common, but that's a lot of orchids for a state. Tennessee ranks fairly high in this list of states for biodiversity in a number of categories, partly because we're in the Southeast, which is the most biodiverse region of the United States, and also because our terrain goes from the coastal plain up to the mountains. So we have you pass through a lot of different types of habitat when that occurs. So I want to start by talking about native plants and why one might want to use them. And this information comes directly from the national website of the Wildlands organization. And so I'll read a few of these. We probably won't hit them all, but it says natives are sustainable, adapted to thrive in your region's soils and weather conditions. So that makes sense. The native plants evolved here. It's not a shock to them to grow here. That's what they and all their predecessors have done. With an exotic plant, you may have to fertilize it or do other things to coax it into enjoying growing in Tennessee. Landscaping with native plants restores a healthy natural environment and creates wildlife habitat. Okay, I think that's true. I have a hard time getting too excited about that one. Many natives are deep-rooted, slowing down stormwater, etc. And that's a great benefit of native plants. They are deep-rooted. You can use grassland installations to mitigate places which have excess water runoff, and it's very effective. So that's a great property of some of our native plants. Native plants don't need fertilizer typically and don't need extra water except in an extreme drought, again, because they evolved here. They act as natural pest controls and reduce the need for pesticides. Many are deer resistant. I would say a few are deer resistant, and I'm not so sure about they did co-evolve with the pests here, so typically they do withstand a lot of pests, but if it's a foreign pest, not so much. Native plants are the foundation of life, and that's a great example, and I'm going to come back on that in the extreme on the next slide. And they also invite butterflies and other pollinators with pollen and nectar rewards. And so that's true of the flowering plants, of course, but not the other plants. So here's the way I would argue that native plants are important to use. So why use native plants? Well, here's a pretty good reason. There was a UN report that came out in May of last year. And in that report, it had some pretty scary information. Nothing that was too shocking, perhaps, but still. 1 million species threatened with extinction, and the extinction rate is accelerating. And so some of the summaries of that information that were attached to the report said that nature is declining globally at rates unprecedented in human history, and the rates of extinction is accelerating, with grave impacts on people around the world now likely. Okay, so that's a pretty strong statement. Sometimes when the UN doesn't like something, it says, the declining biodiversity is not helpful, but this is a more direct statement and more accurate in terms of facts. So another comment about the report that was included with it. The overwhelming evidence from a wide range of different fields of knowledge presents an ominous picture. The health of ecosystems on which we all depend is deteriorating more rapidly than ever. We are eroding the very foundation of our economies, livelihoods, food security, health, and quality of life worldwide. So those are pretty ominous statements. If you look at other studies, and that's a pretty big report, I've not read it, I just read the summaries, but if you look at some other studies, the state of North America's birds in 2019, that report says that 432 species of North American birds are at risk of extinction. So there hasn't been an extinction in a while, but the odds are going up as their high vulnerability scores increase and go up more. In another bird study that was in the journal Science, September 2019, pointed out that we've lost almost 3 billion birds, that's billion with a B, in the last 50 years. So in 1970, we had 10 billion birds. Now we have 7.1 billion birds. So that's a 29% decline. So that doesn't sound good either. Concerning insects, it's hard to count insects because there's so many of them, and it's hard to know they're declining, but the experts say they're declining, and the various reports say anywhere from 1% a year up to 2.5% a year. So we're not sure exactly what that is, but all the reports claim they're declining. The reason all this is pretty bad news is because native plants support biodiversity far better than non-native plants, and that's because they co-evolved with our native insects. So it's absolutely imperative that the use of native plants substantially increase to reverse this declining trend in biodiversity. So I would probably, that's what I meant to do, go back to the previous slide and kind of beef that up a little bit so it's a little more pointed. So let's take a look at the birds and the insects. On the left is the exact graph in the report. The digital artist made it a little hard to read with all the birds that are there and not there. But if you look at that curve, it is typically decreasing, although not every year, it's kind of jagged. But if you look at the first 10 years, it had gone down, there we are, over 1 billion birds. So more than 1 billion birds disappeared from 1970 to 1980. In 1990, it was more than 2 billion had disappeared. These are individuals, not species, of course. But now from 1990 to 2017, when the report data ended, less than 1 billion birds have disappeared. Less than 1 billion is still probably a big number, but the rate at which the birds are declining is decreasing. It's improving, in other words. And at the very bottom here, there's been a little improvement. So whether that improvement continues, we can't know because we can't know the future. But this curve is not nearly as alarming as that statement to me about the insects. The statement on the insects was that the rate of decrease is going up. And so here we have a curve that's decreasing, and farther along we go, the more and more it decreases at a faster and faster rate. So typically in population dynamics, that gives you a curve which goes down pretty quickly if you wait long enough. And also typically with population dynamics, the curve will level off as the population gets very small. So whether that's exactly what's going on with insects, nobody knows because we've only been tracking their population as best we can for a few years. But that's a pretty scary statement that the rate is decreasing at a faster and faster rate. And so this is not a curve based on facts. I just took a qualitative curve and put it in there to capture the statements in the report. But I think we should all be very worried about that. And the report did get some coverage when it came out last May. And then like most news things, the news cycles on to other things. But I think this ought to be mentioned just about every day in the newspaper because of its seriousness. That's a slide that I should have skipped. So let's talk briefly about biodiversity. It's just a contraction of the two words biological diversity, and it just means the variety of life in all of its forms and interactions. So it includes all of the species, all of the gene variation within the species, all the species in the genuses, and just everything put together, the number of interactions between everything. And so it's a very complicated idea. I mean, it's maybe a simple idea, but complicated in implementation. And then the question becomes, how do you measure biodiversity? Is there like a number you can attach to it? And that also is difficult to do, but we have academics that spend their lives thinking about this, and the scientists come together and tell us that biodiversity is either going down or going up, and right now it looks like it's going down in an unacceptable way. So if you look at the catalog of species that have been described by science, the number is somewhere around 1.7 million. If you look at the estimates of how many species there actually are, the estimates go anywhere from 8 to 100 million. So basically, we don't know what we're doing on that, and I'm right along with everybody else. But we could be losing a lot of species and not even know it because we don't even know they're there. And so the predicted decrease in insects, for example, that's a large population of individuals as well. It's hard to have complete confidence in it, but the experts are telling us it's going down, so that's pretty much all I need to know. And then some reports think that the current extinction rate is about 1,000 times higher than before humans dominated the planet. That's a pretty extreme number, but it's extreme. The concern is extreme enough that many scientists believe that we are in a sixth mass extinction event called the Anthropocene. And so the people who decide when we're in a new geological period, or in this case, era, have not officially approved that, but the subcommittee that was studying it for one of the international organizations did recommend the approval of a new, let's see, what would that be? It would be an age, I guess, a new age from the Holocene to the Anthropocene. I was looking it up because I have a chart, a chronostratigraphic chart up there of the geologic periods. Okay, so if we're going to help biodiversity, it's hard to know where to start because one of the papers in the references talks about how with insects, it's like death by 1,000 cuts. There's so many different things that are coming together to make it difficult to get around if you're an insect. Despite that, there are an awful lot of insects still around, but the idea is that it has dropped dramatically in recent history. And so one way we could help the insects out is to plant native plants because that's what they evolved with and that's what they know how to get food from. Some native bees can only use the pollen from one particular plant. So they're not generalists, they're highly specialized. Some butterflies can only lay eggs on one particular plant because their caterpillars can eat only that one plant leaf. They evolved special enzymes to digest whatever nasty chemicals are in that particular plant leaf, but not any others. So one of the few pieces of evidence we have as to how many native plants we need to help out biodiversity is by Desiree Narango, who is a PhD student with Doug Talley at the University of Delaware. She did this incredible study where she got a grant to install GoPro cameras throughout a suburban neighborhood in suburban DC in Virginia. And she installed the cameras so that she could see pictures from each chickadee nest that she could find in that neighborhood. And over a period of time, she analyzed all the data and just sort of jumping to the end, she ran a statistical analysis on it and came out with some pretty good science. And so let me show you what that is. Well, there's a picture of a chickadee, so that's no big surprise, but she put all the data together in this graph. And on the left-hand side is the rate of increase or decrease of the chickadee population. On the bottom axis, that's the percent of non-native plants. And so it would surprise no one if you have a yard with 100% non-native plants, no matter where your yard falls in this 95% confidence interval, the chickadee population is going to be decreasing in your yard. And the percent here is plants by volume. So you can't just plant like a whole bunch of tiny little native plants and change the scale. So you have to, she looked at the volume of all the trees and the plants in the yard. So if we look at where the confidence interval first reaches the sustainability line, that's 30% non-native plants, 70% native by volume. Okay, so if you plant 70% native plants, you still have a slim chance of helping the chickadee population because all of the confidence interval is at 0 or below. The black line represents the median of the confidence interval. And so the first time that gets positive, it's right around there, which is 6%. That's 6% non-native 94% native. So that's a lot of native plants. But there's a trick we can use to help ourselves out. But to summarize Dr. Narango's research, we need a lot of native plants. And that trick is to use keystone plants. Keystone plants are plants that are the most productive in supporting biodiversity. So if you look at trees and find a tree that supports, say, 500 different caterpillars, as opposed to just 50 caterpillars, the one that does 500 is going to be a lot more productive in supporting biodiversity. And that research was carried out by, again, Desiree Narango, Doug Tallamy, and Kimberly Shropshire, all from the University of Delaware. And so it turns out that just a few keystone plant genuses, the official word is genera, but I sound too geeky if I say that. So a few key keystone plant genuses support the majority of Lepidoptera species. And that was I don't think that article is I guess it is publicly available. I think it's in these extra material. And so the analysis in this article is complicated. And I didn't read all of the article. I read the abstract and just took what I needed from that and kind of glanced at the rest of the article. But the small number of plant genuses that support a majority of moths and butterflies are called keystone plants. And so we can get away with fewer native plants, not that we would want to do that, but some people, as they're building up their native plants, would need to do that by using these keystone plants. And conveniently, Doug Tallamy has worked, and his associates have worked with the National Wildlife Foundation and established a beta testing webpage, but it works pretty well. If you go to this native plant finder at the National Wildlife Foundation organization and type in your zip code, the computer will spit out the top plants for your zip code in terms of the number of Lepidopteran species they host. And by Lepidopteran species, they mean moths and butterflies. So genus-wide, oaks are the winner in almost every county in the United States. In my county, which is in Williamson County, in my zip code in Williamson County, the oaks collectively host 432 species of Lepidopterans. And you can see, even if you go down the list a good ways on the tree side, you still get pretty big numbers. Even at the very bottom of the list, you've got a 30 or 40 number of Lepidopterans hosted. It's a little different with the perennial plants. These are grasses and perennial plants on the right. The goldenrod is the most productive of those plants, but it only supports 90. And if you look at the tree list, that looks meager, but it's the best of the perennials. And so this goes all the way down through hibiscus on the number 8 there, which hosts 25. That third from the bottom, the false indigo, is a not common plant. So if your county doesn't have false indigo in it, or sorry, if your zip code doesn't have false indigo in it, that would probably bump up to the geraniums to number 8 at the bottom there. So if you want to take this for a test bin, it's a pretty interesting site. It's fairly easy to use. You don't have to learn a bunch of shortcuts and tricks to use it. So the summary there is that biodiversity is decreasing. We can help it out by increasing our number of native plants, and that's what we all should do. If humans disappeared from the Earth would be just fine. If insects, for example, disappear from the Earth, we have no food to eat, everything falls apart, and the world is going to be in serious trouble. Humans would decrease, maybe not to extinction, but pretty far down. So I'll just quickly show you what I did. And this is my subdivision in Franklin, 350 something homes, mostly on a 1/3 acre lots. The subdivision was put in the mid-90s. There's home sweet home for me. And it's 1/3 of an acre if you count all the way out to the sidewalk. But I've got this crazy feature in my front yard where the HOA controls, although I own, this planted median. And so they do what they want to do out there. And the benefit for me is it obscures anything going on in my yard, which might not be HOA compliant. If I'm in a transition stage in my garden, or if the milkweed is getting out of hand. I can't really see that. Behind my house, there's HOA property, goes 20 to 30 feet. And behind that, there's a gated subdivision where I guess all the rich people live. I'm not really sure. So when I moved into the house in 2004, it had fairly typical 1990s suburban Nashville landscaping. It had a lot of firepower and andina, little bitty shrubs, various boxwoods, holly hedges, yew shrubs, and Manhattan euonymus. It was almost formulaic. If I drove around the neighborhood in the mid-2000s, I would see almost every yard with almost these exact same plants in it with very little variation. The firepower nandina is a sterile cultivar of Nandina domestica. Nandina domestica is on the invasive plant list because its fruit kills cedar waxwings and other birds that get carried away eating too much of it. And it is invasive as well. But the firepower nandina is harmless. It just does not serve any function in the ecosystem except doing a minor amount of conversion of CO2 to oxygen and taking up a little bit of water, which it's a small plant, so it can't take up too much. The boxwoods were pretty sickly. They got a blight at some point. The hedges lost several of those from I have no idea what. The yew shrubs are indestructible, but again, they don't really contribute much to the insect population or the ecosystem. And the Manhattan euonymus excelled in growing powdery mildew. And so it was difficult to deal with that. So there's what it looked like when I moved in. It looks pretty good. Kind of a nice, typical suburban landscape with shaped hedges, shaped shrubs, some leary oak on the front, or I think that's what that is. It had some hostas that aren't blooming now. And I don't know what this flowering thing is over here. This is my spouse trying to make the point that the guys stand around and yak while the girls do all the work. But I think she had to wait 30 minutes to take that picture. But there, we did the usual things. We got a leaf blower there, a bag for our cuttings, and Franklin at that point, I don't think they had trash pickup where they recycle the cuttings. We do have that now. So around, this is 2014 now, there's some differences. I've got a prunus tree right there. A cherry tree has been planted. I've got some black-eyed Susans in the back. And this one is the gray-headed coneflower. And you can't see all of this, but I have 3 plants that are black-eyed Susans and 3 plants that are gray-headed coneflower. I have a salvia over here that's not native, but it does flower all summer, and the pollinators like getting nectar from it. Still have the hostas, still have the firepower nandina, and I'm not quite sure what these 2 shrubs here on the front, but there is a bee balm, a collection of bee balms that one of the naturalists at Warner Parks gave me from their native garden. So I brought him a bunch of dirt with bee balm in it and just stuck it there, and it's been happy ever since. Also in 2014, I had gone through the Tennessee naturalist training, but I didn't really know much. So I was trying to learn about plants back then. And so I found this moth that's actually on let's see, what is that called? So the host plant, it's passion vine. Yeah, that moth was on passion vine. I was able to convince myself it was a wavy-lined emerald moth. And I also found this inchworm on one of my aster plants on the side yard. This is an inchworm that likes to decorate itself with plant parts from the plant it's on as a way of camouflage. And so those little parts, you can see some of those are seeds from the plant right there. And then years later, I discovered that inchworm is the caterpillar form of the wavy-lined emerald moth. So I had both the caterpillar and the adult in my yard at the same time in 2014, but I didn't realize that. So I'm getting a lot more life in my yard with the native plants that are already producing some life I didn't have before. And so Down the road a bit, this is the egg on that cherry tree of a red-spotted purple butterfly. In the middle, you've got a egg for the Gulf fritillary butterfly on the purple passion vine, our state wildflower. And then I'd installed a little bit of milkweed, and pretty soon it got those monarch eggs again in 2014. The purple passion vine or purple passion flower is the host plant for a couple of butterflies, one of which is the Gulf fritillary. We had lots of caterpillars chewing on our plant, and I caught one just as it was about to convert to a chrysalis. And so across the day, about 10 hours worth, it started hanging. They always go into a J. They kind of harden up and change into what you see on the right, which is a fully formed, I believe, chrysalis. They take 10 days to 2 weeks, and then they can emerge as an adult. So here's an example of the, let's see, it looks like all of those are Gulf fritillary caterpillars, and they've already decimated the leaf material. So what I had to relocate them to the backyard where I had some passion flower that wasn't quite so decimated. And so I was running out of places where the caterpillars were running out of places to hang from. So I had to help them out a little bit by artificially introducing some hangers. And I think that's probably hot glue on the top, which you have to do pretty carefully. But anyway, after a while, the butterfly, it's called eclosing. They eclose, which is the opposite of closing, and they drip a little red fluid on whatever's below them. And then they're in a lot of danger right then because they can't fly. They have to dry their wings out. So they flap their wings slowly, trying to dry them out. And as soon as they're dry enough, they'll fly away where they're not in quite so much danger. I also put some partridge pea in. It's an annual that's easy to grow. You just kind of throw it on some dirt and you're good to go. So I had a lot of that. That's a host plant for cloudless sulfur and also the orange sulfur. On the right is another Gulf fritillary on a purple passion vine tendril. And when the caterpillar emerges, in every species I've seen, the first thing it does is it eats the shell, the egg shell. So nothing goes to waste in nature. The purple passion flower is also the host plant to the variegated butterfly, and that one's on the left, and the Gulf fritillary is on the right. So the variegated fritillary and the Gulf fritillary, the variegated has the white dots in caterpillar form, but the Gulf fritillary has the white dots in the adult form. Monarch chrysalis on the left, it happens to be hanging from a monarch plant, from a milkweed plant, but they can hang from anywhere. In the middle there, those are all Gulf fritillary chrysalises. So my eaves were getting decorated by that kind of animal material. And again, there's a monarch coming out of the chrysalis. And somehow I think the monarch knew to hang its chrysalis on the back side of that leaf up against the house. If it had been facing the other way, it would have been easily spotted by birds. But this way it was protected because the house is right behind it and it's on the back side of the leaf, so it's not easily visible. Other things I planted, well, not the red maple, that was already there when I moved in, but it's a beautiful tree. And it's in that part of the planted medium that I don't control, but I actually own. But there's the flower on the left, and it's red. And there's the fruit on the right, the samara, that helicopters down, and it's also red. The tree on the right is something I introduced. It's the white fringe tree. I don't think it's a particularly productive plant in the environment, but when you're that beautiful, I'll cut you some slack. It's just a really gorgeous, gorgeous flower in the spring. Unfortunately, it's in the olive family in the same section as the ash trees are, and so it is susceptible to emerald ash borer. However, it seems to be a plant of last resort. They'll go through the ashes completely before they pick on the white fringe trees. So I'm hoping I can dodge that bullet. So further down, this is 2020, that HOA property in the back, I asked the board of the neighborhood if I could remove invasives from my property if I replaced them with something attractive. And they didn't know what I was saying, so they just said yes. And what happened was in spring of 2020, I removed about 5 to 8 feet of invasives going into that wooded area. I left everything else alone so that I would continue to have screening. But that fall, there apparently were some white crown beard seeds in the seed bank because those erupted in the fall. And not only does it give you flowers to look at, it's an extraordinarily productive plant for supporting pollinators, including butterflies. And so around September, that thing was pretty busy. I guess late August and early September is when the white crown beard blooms. It's also the frostweed plant, the one that produces the frost ribbons at the bottom the first spring, the first freeze. Some other plants, I have a persimmon on the left bottom, a couple of 9-barks now. The little plant right there is a buckeye, and it's a bottlebrush buckeye. We're kind of just past the north end of its native range, but it's not a tree, it's more of a shrub, but it produces a spike of flowers that are also great attractors for insects of various kinds, but especially butterflies. The partridge pea was my sulfur factory. The mountain mint, it is very productive right now. When I go out and look at it, it usually has somewhere between 8 and 10 things on it, whether it's not so popular with the butterflies, but the bees, the wasps, the hoverflies like it quite a bit as well. And remember, goldenrod was the most productive perennial plant for supporting biodiversity, so there it is. Unfortunately, I have a couple of ash trees, which I'll remove as soon as they get infected with the emerald ash borer. And that's a sugar maple I bought from National Natives for $25, and now it's up about, this is 2020, so it's a little taller now, but it's almost 18 feet there. Other things around the yard, there's bee balm, both front yard and side yard. This is a downy pagoda plant. It's in the mint family, produces nectar that a lot of the flying insects like. Here's a goldfinch on the gray-headed coneflower. They really like that quite a bit. And normally the purple coneflower has things on it. I did specifically plant plants that support butterflies. I've got milkweed, spicebush, pawpaw. Saw my first butterfly from it, and that would be the zebra swallowtail. It's our state butterfly, I think. I also planted some pipevine. This is woolly pipevine. The underside of the leaf is kind of hairy. There's one that's a big leaf pipevine as well, but it is the host plant for the pipevine swallowtail caterpillar and butterfly. And here's our friend, the passion flower again. This is the black swallowtail caterpillar, and it hosts on various parsley member families. This happens to be dill, but there's not a lot of leaf material on dill, so I've replaced it for the most part with golden Alexander. A variety of birds visit my yard. I've only had nests from Carolina wrens, and then the bluebirds you see there. They come back seemingly every year, and we get the second clutch of the year in our box. I don't know where they go for the first one. Occasionally get cedar waxwings passing through, but not often. This is a cloudless sulfur from the what I called my sulfur factory, the partridge pea, and it really likes red flowers. Here I have some cypress vine, which is not native, and it can be aggressive, so I just don't let it spread beyond a certain area. But it is usually loaded with the cloudless sulfurs and the orange sulfurs. I would speculate that the cloudless sulfurs have a pretty long proboscis because it has to get down to about right there to get to the nectarine. Hummingbirds like that plant as well. And I don't think I've ever seen the cloudless sulfur on the coral honeysuckle in my yard, but the hummingbirds like that one as well. Here we are back in the HOA property with the white crown beard. That's a spicebush swallowtail butterfly. It didn't host on my spicebush because I've never had any chew marks on my leaves there. So it took a long time with the pawpaws to get it to host the zebra swallowtail, but the spicebush are going pretty slow. But here's a closer picture of the white crown beard. And I've still got some crazy vines and some bush honeysuckle back in there that'll come out before the end of the year. I guess, okay, I guess I didn't label it. That's Plains coreopsis. And let me give a shout out for this plant. This is Anise hyssop. It's actually not native to Tennessee. It's only native in one county in Kentucky, but it's all over Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin. And it does fine here. You might think it would suffer in the hot summers, not being from the South, but it actually does quite fine. You usually get 2 or 3 years out of a Anise hyssop. And the amazing thing is it's in bloom for about 2 months, from late May into July. And so it fills that gap between some of the spring wildflowers until when the mountain mint, for example, comes online. But it is a wonderful pollinator magnet. Let's see, so this is an orange sulfur. It's a little different from the cloudless sulfur. The upper side of its front wing has a dark patch on it. And this is on a plant called false sunflower. Here's the scarlet hibiscus. And this is a cloudless sulfur, which is a little bit bigger than the orange sulfur. So this gives you an idea of how big that petal, that flower really is. It's at least 6 inches across. So it's a showstopper display. The flowers usually last 1 day, but there are so many flowers on the plant that one's ready to come out the next day. We get painted ladies pretty regularly. Painted lady, I think, is the most widespread butterfly that we have. It's in 5 continents. Only Australia and South America do not have painted ladies. And the European version of painted lady engages in the longest migration, I think, known to butterflies. It goes from the Arctic Circle down to sub-Saharan Africa, which is about 9,000 miles each way. Ohio, the common buckeye is a regular visitor. That's on mountain mint in the backyard. And recently, I became more interested in the bees, the flies, and the wasps that visit plants. And so these names won't be familiar to most of you, but each one has an interesting story. Just for example, the katydid wasp stings and paralyzes katydids, takes them into its nursery, and there you have a long-term food supply because it's paralyzed and living, so it doesn't rot. And so when the eggs hatch, they have a long time to take their time eating the katydid. Let's see, there's a carpenter bee on beard tongue. And the funny thing about this picture is that a bumblebee will go straight into the floral tube, but the carpenter bee is too wide to get in the floral tube, so it cheats and it goes to the base of the flower stem and drills straight into the nectary and gets the nectar reward without really paying the price of pollinating the beard tongue. So there's an unknown bee on bee balm. Now, this is my new favorite creature. That's about 2 millimeters long, and it's a hoverfly. This one is the eastern calligrapher, and it's recently been conjectured in a couple of studies that the hoverflies do about 35% of the pollination compared to the native bees. And so that's kind of interesting. They also have interesting decorations on their abdomen that help you distinguish who they are. There's another type of hoverfly, the maize calligrapher. This is another kind of hoverfly, the bristlefly. And these are called bee mimics. They act like they're bees, but they only have 2 wings, so they're really flies. And I do have my fair share of rabbits. The other day I was watering some creeping flocks and a bunch of babies jumped out and they found their way back, but it scared me. Okay, so what can you do? Well, you would do something different because we're all different. If you don't have a yard to alter, you could volunteer at native nature centers, and volunteer to remove invasive plants, which is an important component, or maybe work in their native gardens. I know Alice Hill would be delighted to have more people help them. But if you have a yard, I would suggest you remove your invasive plants if you have any, and then you try to expand the population of native plants and reduce the population of non-native. Now, most people have some favorite non-native plants, and so I say keep those. Don't give away your mother's whatever. But the idea is to shrink the lawn, to shrink the non-native plants, and to increase the native plants. So however you do it, that's the idea. And then I did mine a little bit each year. Some years I did more in terms of yanking out the landscaping plants that weren't producing. But baby steps are, I think, the way to go. This is one of my favorite things to consult. Middle Tennessee is working on its own version of this. This is from Chattanooga Area Pollinator Partnership, which is associated with Wildlands, the Tennessee Valley chapter. And so this is very informative because they've got a lot of native plants listed, and they show you what color the bloom is and when it blooms. And so just a quick glance at this chart, and you can see there's no gap in the bloom time. And so pollinators come out at a particular time, each species, and if there's nothing there to get nectar from or pollen, it's going to be a bit out of luck. So you really want to have something there year round, and ideally something for the long-tongued bees as well as the short-tongued bees, but that's getting pretty specific. Well, that's it. So thank you very much for sitting through all that. Be delighted to see if you have any questions and participate in the rest of the program. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard.
You're welcome.
That was an amazing, very, very informative presentation about native plants and why we should do it. I've heard this for years, and I never really understood the real reason why we need to plant native plants. And it's really more for the biodiversity of our of the life forms that are around us. So
exactly.
Right. You know, one thing that you had brought up, I noticed a majority of your that you were showing the pictures from your yard were caterpillars and butterflies. And I was wondering if you could just say why you try to attract so many caterpillars. Seems like you're doing that for a reason.
Right. The caterpillars are the best food for baby birds. And they don't have, they're not like beetles, which have sharp edges. It's just like a little sausage packed with protein and fat. And so if you can grow caterpillars, you may be growing it so you can see beautiful butterflies, but you have to allow that the birds are going to find those and use them effectively. Right. So I focused on the caterpillars because I wanted to see the butterflies, knowing that the caterpillars would also be used as food for birds. And so I give them their fair share. I don't try to protect the plants just to save the caterpillars. But there's enough there that I get plenty of butterflies in most years. Now, this is a pretty bad year so far. And the freeze that we had late spring was a big factor, but we'll see how it goes. The North American Butterfly Association bird count from midsummer is this Saturday. And so we'll have some numbers to look at to see how the butterflies are doing this year. Okay. So I have recently gotten interested in the bees. So I'm trying to pay more attention to the bees, flies, and wasps now as well. And that's really because of Doug Tallamy's The Nature of Oaks book.
That is an amazing book. I've read it too. And it's,
yes.
I think everyone should read it and everyone should plant an oak tree. Now let's go to some questions. So now we're going to do the interactive Q&A section of our presentation. First, I'm going to go into the chat and see if we have any questions there. We're going to do a poll, actually 3 polls, and then yeah, we'll see. Try to figure out what your questions are, and hopefully you can have a chance to answer that. Have them answered today. First off, Antoinette is asking, when watering plants, do you need to water on the ground and roots only, so as not to wash the eggs and young insects off?
I always do water on the ground. It's not for that specific reason necessarily, but I think that's a good point. If you watered on the leaves, you could conceivably wash some eggs off, but it's a good idea to have a layer of mulch around the tree to protect it from lawnmowers hitting it and to hold the water in. And so I really water the mulch directly. and try to make sure water doesn't run off. If I see the water running off, I'll go water something else and come back to that tree after the water's soaked in. So there's this sort of old joke of arborists: if you take a 5-gallon bucket to water a tree, a half-gallon gets to the roots and 4.5 gallons run off. So don't fall victim to that joke.
She also asked if you see leaves that are being eaten up in your garden. Is that good?
That's wonderful. It's you may not see what's eating it because it might be a moth caterpillar that is mainly active at night or anything else. But when I saw the butterfly, if I see a butterfly in my yard and I know the plant that it hosts on, I'll go find that plant and see if I have chew marks on it or if it came from somebody else's plant. And so with the zebra swallowtail that I saw maybe a month ago, I went directly to my 2 pawpaws and both of them had marks on it, but I couldn't find any more caterpillars on it. But I think it's exciting to see the chew marks. There's Doug Dallamy quotes, I forget her name, from New Orleans, that says, if seeing holes in your leaves bothers you, there's a 10-step program to fix that. And that is, you take 10 steps back and then you can't see the holes so big.
I have these plants that just come up in my yard and, I think, okay, that's weeds. And there's all these little holes in them and eaten up, and of course I would normally think, oh, I got to get rid of these things, and I've just been thinking, well, maybe that's good. So that was the answer to my question.
Right.
I have a question.
If you have the leafcutter bees leave very attractive cuts. They come in from the edge and cut out a semicircle. And you really don't even notice it as something wrong with the leaf. It just looks like a new kind of leaf.
Ah. I have another question about mulch. I was recently told that the normal mulch that we put out that looks good, the red and the black mulch that you see to make your house look nice, is not good at all, and that you should use some form of pine needles or some sort of pine bark mulch is the best to use. And so of course, I learned that right after I had put all this mulch down in all my little garden, around my thing, plants and things. So I guess I'm wondering, should I just rake that all out and get rid of it and put some pine mulch in? Because I have to say, and I'll tell everybody, when I moved into this house in 2005, there was pine mulch in my yard, and I got no weeds, literally for years there. And then for some stupid reason, I added some other mulch, and there's constantly weeds coming through this other mulch that's supposed to look better. So I'm just wondering if I should just rake this other stuff out and replace it with pine mulch or what?
Yeah, the worst mulch would be the one that actually has a colorant added. And so if you could have red mulch, unless it's cedar, then it was probably painted red with the colorant. And it's not the best thing to use because you're just introducing unneeded chemicals into your landscape.
I realized it dyes my dog's feet red.
Ah, do you have red mulch?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the colorant.
I know. It's just, so I should rake that out, right? I should just rake it out, get rid of it.
I don't know. You might be able to leave it until it needs replacing and then just go back with something that's a little healthier. If you use a pure hardwood mulch, that changes the chemistry of the soil a little bit, so that's not the best idea either. If it's a composted hardwood mulch, maybe you're okay, but really the pine-based products are superior to the hardwood. And I have no expertise in this. I'm just quoting what Grow Wild's employees tell me, Mike Berkeley, Terry Barnes. So they know what they're talking about, and I only know a little bit. So
that's how I learned about it. I'm like, oh, great.
Yeah, the type of pine. There are a lot of pine products out there. If you go with the pine nuggets, they can float away. So if you're on a slope, you wouldn't want to use those. But if you're level, they work pretty well. But products with ground up pine bark, like pine fines or pine straw, is perfectly suitable. In fact, at Grow Wild, they use almost exclusively pine straw, and I never see weed in their gardens.
There were no weeds. I don't know why that didn't click in my brain, but okay. That's really important, and I never hear anyone talking about mulch and that. So anyway, I've learned that.
Good. Well, we have a few more questions. Do any perennials do well in containers? My front yard is very sunny with very, very clay soil.
I like planting in containers, and so I do that almost fearlessly. And you can put them out in your yard and then just move them wherever you want. And so a lot of perennials do fine in pots. It's just you may not want to get a pot as big as some perennials need, but yeah, it's a great way to have plants. And if you got some bad behaviors, like if you want to plant some mint because you like to use it in drinks or something, that definitely would want to go in a container. And of course, it's not native, but you can take bad behaviors and put them in containers and rein them in pretty well. I do that with morning glories quite a bit. I've got morning glories, which some are native and some aren't. And it's really hard to sort out which are which. But I put them in containers and put a growing structure on top of it, and then they bloom in the morning, and the pollinators with the long tongues like to hit them.
Okay, good to know. Okay, so we have a question from Kim. And Kim, if I pronounce this incorrectly, just turn your mic on and correct me. So she decided to use the scientific name. So what is the Lonicera diravilla invasive or native?
I'm looking for that question so I can see what you're saying.
So it is, I don't know how to say it.
That's Ashley. It's me. It's my question. It's a bush honeysuckle, but I researched it and it was supposed to be some kind of native bush honeysuckle.
There is a native bush honeysuckle that's usually farther north than we are. Is it? That sounds like what that might be.
Okay.
What's the genus and species?
Lonicera diravilla.
Yeah, I've never used that. I've seen that in lists, but I'm thinking they're for places a little farther north.
Okay.
I have got some in my yard.
Have you checked the Tennessee Herbarium site or the USDA distribution site to see where it's from?
Who was saying they had it in their yard?
This is Cindy Whitt. I got it at Grow Wild. It's in my yard. It does wonderfully. It has tiny little yellow flowers on it that the bees love. But I wouldn't say, I'm pretty sure it's native since I got it to Grow Wild. But it's big. It's big,
Okay. I got
Grow
mine.
Wild has a fairly liberal definition of native, but if the Grow Wild sells it, it's native somewhere nearby, maybe not right where we are, but they grow plants from the coastal plain and the mountains, and so they know what they're doing, and they're committed to the native cause more than as much as anybody.
Cool. So we do have a statement here from Karen. She said, Richard and his group have saved our pollinators wildlife garden at my school because someone thought the pollinator garden wasn't pretty enough. He and Diane, who's also on the call, are real heroes. So
thank you, Karen.
Richard.
We enjoy working in your garden, and Diane is really responsible for this because she's the one that took me over to your garden at Westmead Elementary School and showed it to me, and I thought we could make a difference, and I'm glad we have.
Yes, thank you.
So we have a poll. We're going to just post all 3 questions at one time, and you can answer them. It'll sit up there for just a minute, and then we'll see the results. So let me see if this works.
Yes.
All right. So which type of trees should you plant to support biodiversity? A maple tree, a hackberry tree, an oak tree, or a magnolia tree? And then which type of flower should you plant to support biodiversity? An aster, a goldenrod, a coneflower, or a violet? And then the last one is, which types of plants are invasive or non-native plants? This is a multiple choice one, so you can choose multiple options. Is it a bush honeysuckle, a Japanese honeysuckle, a Chinese privet, a hackberry tree, or a Bradbury pear? So I'll just give you a minute to answer those questions. You know, Richard, I remember you in your presentation, you listed maple trees as, I guess there's a variety of options for maple trees, but you planted in your, I think what you said was an Acer maple tree was the one that is native to this area, but you planted a sugar maple tree. So is a sugar maple tree native to Tennessee, or is that?
Yes,
just, it is?
Red maple, sugar maple, and silver maple are the three native maple trees in this area that I know of. There may be others.
Does it run and create actual maple syrup? Because I'm from Pennsylvania, and I used to get maple syrup.
It doesn't get cold enough here to produce maple syrup. You need harder freezes for that to work. So we can't really get a good quality maple syrup here. You can extract the sap, you know, maybe 40, 50, 60 gallons, boil it down to less than a gallon, and maybe have something. But it's just not as, doesn't work as well as Vermont.
Right. Okay.
But the sugar maple would be the one, if you're going to tap one, that you would tap, because when the sap suckers hit the sugar maple, you can see water, you know, the sap flowing out of the holes.
Right.
Whereas with the red maple, I've never seen it.
Okay. Okay. So the answer is exactly right. Nobody got that wrong. So I think you did a great job, Richard, on reiterating oak tree, not to mention the slide shows oak. All right, flowers, which type of flower? And you are correct. It is a goldenrod. And then the ones that are invasive and non-native plants, a bush honeysuckle, a Japanese honeysuckle, a Chinese privet, and a Bradford pear are all invasive non-native plants. The hackberry tree is a native to Tennessee, which I've got a ton of those around my house. And Richard told me, I never knew this. I always knew there are little aphids that live on the tree that creates, which I didn't know it actually had a name, but the honeydew that sticks on the car and then turns black and creates, makes everything black in Tennessee. So he said that the hackberry tree is native, but the aphids are not.
Oh.
So does anyone know how the aphids got here? Where they came from? Is that too much detail? It's such a big thing in Nashville, at least. Everything gets covered with honeydew. So.
All I know is they're white and woolly. They're a member of the woolly aphids, but.
Okay. Good to know. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing. All right, so let's move forward. So I know Richard already did a what can you do, and we're just going to do a quick iteration, slight variation of that. So what can you do? You can take a survey of your lawn or your land if you have a larger area. Identify which plants are native and which plants are non-native. Then find a local nursery who specializes in native plants. Identify the native plants that you like and what that attracts, the most life, and then make a plan and a schedule. I mean, you probably don't want to do it all at once, but you might be able to. But if not, then do sections of the yard and slowly do it year after year. And pull out all the native and invasive plants, and then plant your favorite native plants in its place, and then take care of them and watch them grow and watch them bring in butterflies and bees and other beautiful life forms.
How much of the lawn additives and mosquito spraying and all that stuff affects the biodiversity and kills the bugs and things like that. I've just noticed so many less fireflies and butterflies and bees. And then I went on and did a bunch of research, and it looks like things that make your lawn green, weed and feed and true green and all that stuff is actually killing the beneficial bugs. Anyway,
Richard, do you want to address that really quick? There's another question, and I know we're done with Q&As, but there is another question about using herbicides and pesticides in your garden.
Right. As far as the yard treatments, if they contain insecticides, those are general insecticides that would infect presumably all insects. There aren't any insecticides that work on mosquitoes, for example. And so we recommend against using a mosquito spray that contains insecticide or a yard treatment that contains an insecticide. Now, there are some essential oil treatments, and we don't know, they're probably less bad than the insecticides. And so a lot of the Mosquito Joe type businesses are offering what they call a natural alternative. And I don't know enough about how to analyze I have trouble finding out what's in their product, but I believe it contains no insecticide and has essential oils and, camphor and things like that, citronella oil. And so I might be willing to give them the benefit of the doubt on that. But definitely a product that contains insecticides is bad news for the insects.
I've done a lot of research on that, and basically if it kills mosquitoes, it's going to kill all the bugs. There's nothing that just gets mosquitoes.
The only exception to that is the mosquito dunk, the bacteria.
Yeah,
if you
yeah, those are great. The ones you put in your fountains or your bird bath.
But they impact only the mosquito larva and don't seem to hurt anything else.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. And then I went to some of the sites of beekeepers, like all that, and they are very against all that stuff just because it says it's natural or whatever. Even if it doesn't kill something, if it's repelling them, that's not good, So anyway.
Yeah, with mosquitoes, people need to do more maintenance, like make sure their gutters aren't sagging in the middle, because that produces standing water that you can't see, and that produces a lot of mosquitoes. So sometimes just getting a gutter repair person out is the thing to do. And if there's standing water in your yard, get rid of it, or put a bucket in your yard, fill it with some grass clippings, wait a couple of weeks and throw the mosquito dunk in there, and you'll kill whatever mosquito larvae are trying to grow in your bucket. So that's another control mechanism. If you would plant a dragonfly-friendly yard, you need a water source where they can lay their eggs. Dragonflies are super duper mosquito killers.
Really?
Yeah.
Good to know.
So it's kind of an nature out of balance situation where we don't have dragonflies, we don't have the gnatcatcher bird, the various birds that do eat mosquitoes. If we got that kind of back in balance, it would help.
That makes sense.
But mosquitoes are just they're bad news across the world, and so it's just a hard problem to deal with.
Also, keeping the mosquitoes off you, just putting a fan in your backyard on low. If the air's moving, the mosquitoes can't come and bite you. There's other alternatives. Aren't there some plants that you can plant that repel mosquitoes and things like that?
There are several. I don't know what they are, but you can look that up on the web easily and get 3 or 4 plants you could plant around your deck or patio, and that would help, especially if combined with a fan and monitoring standing water and just all the common sense things that people used to do before they could just pick up a phone and call an exterminator to come out and take care of their yard.
Citronella is one of those plants. And if you go to Thistle Farms, they have a really quite nice insect repellent that doesn't have DEET in it that does repel an awful lot of insects. But the suggestion Antoinette made about using a fan really does work if you're going to have a picnic or anything like that. It just is amazing. And also, you know, like people hate possums, but like possums eat tons of ticks. So as Richard was saying, the balance of nature is really what's out of balance. And that's the problem. If we have things in balance correctly, we aren't going to be overwhelmed by any of those things.
Bats also eat lots of mosquitoes. And yeah, the possums eat like 300 ticks a night. So I love those little dudes.
Okay, so let's go ahead and move forward. Let's talk about the deep dive. And we have a lot of material that Richard has provided, and I'm going to pop them into the chat area. First, we're going to start with articles on the decline of biodiversity. These are fantastic articles, very scientific. Some of them are scientific, but they definitely go into exactly why we are having this decline in biodiversity around the world. So check that out. I'm going to actually see if I can put them, I'm going to put them all into the chat. You're going to be overwhelmed, I think. Hopefully it'll work. Okay. And then, so it talks about, he's got this, and Richard, do you want to talk about these really quick? I think you probably provide.
Sure. The first one, number one under articles, is the May 2020 United Nations report. Had hundreds of scientists around the world collaborating on that. That's the one that said that biodiversity is decreasing at a faster and faster rate. So that's the one that scared me the most. The state of the birds has been going on for years. They don't do it every year, but they try to get a snapshot of the birds. And that's possible because of all the citizen science that goes on with birds. There's a lot of data out there. Not so much with insects, because a lot of people don't study insects, and there's so many of them, they're so hard to identify. But with birds, you have lots of expert birders to help you out. And that's the one which showed the birds were decreasing very rapidly starting in 1970, but the decrease is beginning to level off and not be so scary, but we're down almost 3 million birds. So that's the scary part, but at least it's a little bit encouraging that it seems to be turning around. The decline of North American avifauna is pretty much the same story. It's the 2.9 billion decrease from the 10 million birds we had in 1970. The Guardian article is fantastic. It's not a scientific article, it's a summary of what's going on and is done very intelligently and is very accurate. So for a more casual read, but still fairly scary read, you could look at that Guardian article. The Insect Decline in the Anthropocene, Death by a Thousand Cuts, is a technical scientific article. You may want to just read the abstract and look at a few of the graphs and then call it a night. So those are my comments on the 5 articles.
Okay, so he's also providing an additional articles on native plant support for biodiversity. So you can see, and Richard, I'll just hand it over to you. I mean, you're the expert in this, so I'll just let you talk about them.
So the first article is Desiree Narango's PhD thesis put in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And that's the one that shows that to support chickadees in that suburban DC neighborhood, you really need to have more than 70% native plants. 96 is even better, but anything over 70 is getting in the right direction. The second article is the one that shows that a few keystone plants can support more than half of the butterfly lepidopteran species. And so if you'll concentrate on the keystone plants using that National Wildlife Foundation native plant finder, you can do more good than if you just pick a collection of pretty flowers. Those help, but they're not as good as, say, an oak tree or a willow tree. And so you want to do at least a few keystone plants and then make your yard look pretty.
And you may want to emphasize these Doug Tallamy books, Nature's Best Hope and The Nature of Oaks. Both of these are excellent.
So right, his first book came out in 2007. That was Bringing Nature Home, great book. But it's basically been replaced by Nature's Best Hope. So I don't think you need to read this first book. you could jump to this one and get everything you need. And he does a really good job, I guess, energizing people, explaining the value of native plants and how they work, what they do. And it's a very inspiring book. The Nature of Oaks is a little more technical, but it shows off Doug's entomology side. It's really should be called The Nature of Oaks and the Insects That They Host, because it's all about the insects more than it is just about the oaks. And it's just fascinating, though, the detail, just to have that kind of detail. You know, who else could explain the gall wasps as well as he does, and what they do and how they do it? It's just if you're into that kind of thing, it's just really a great book, and it's my favorite book that he's written.
He has also done several, you can find him on YouTube. There's several different speeches he's done, you know, video speeches he's done. So definitely check him out online. Invasive plants. Do you want to talk about this one?
Yes, we have a Tennessee Invasive Plant Council. I'm not sure who the chair is. It might be Margie Hunter. But there's a lot of literature on their website. If you have invasive plants and you want to remove them but plant something similarly, they suggest native plants you can put in their place. And you may have trouble identifying all the invasive plants, but you could use an app like Picture This to help you out a little bit, or contact somebody more knowledgeable. And but it is important to get the invasive plants out. Now, if you can uproot them, that's fine. They're Metro Nashville, the Public Works Department has a tool checkout program where you can check out a weed wrench, which is a device that will extract trees and shrubs if they're not too big. If you find you have so let's say you have a Chinese privet that's 6 inches in diameter at the base, you can't possibly pull that out without a backhoe. But what you could do is you could cut it off, say 3 inches from the ground, and then you could paint the cut immediately with a strong solution of glyphosate, at least 18% is what I use. A lot of people use 40%. It's stronger than what you would spray on crabgrass. That's more like 1%. But if you paint that cut right after you cut the tree, that will usually cause the least environmental damage. You're getting none into the ground, just right at that cut. That will be carried to the roots if you paint it within 5 minutes, and that will normally kill the Chinese privet or the bush honeysuckle in particular. So if they're too big to extract, you can use an herbicide. Just be careful not to do a blind spray. I actually use a transfer pipette to get the product put exactly on the cut.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. All right, and you have several websites or phone apps that you can go to as a plant identifier. So do you want to talk about these?
Yeah, the Tennessee Native Plant Society put out this book several years ago, Wildflowers of Tennessee. And then they had to add the Ohio Valley and Southern Appalachians because they're in the same level 1 ecoregion as we are. But that also helped the plant sales, because if you put out a book, Wildflowers of Tennessee, people in Kentucky won't buy it, they were told. That's a great book. Dennis Horn is just unbelievable. He's 85. He still leads hikes. He's sharp. He's just a wonderful person. And all the other authors that helped are good. So that's sort of everybody's first native plant ID book in Tennessee. I used to go on, well, I still do go on a lot of the TNPS hikes, and that is the book they sell. They sell it for $25 if locally. Amazon may be around $27, but for the convenience, you may want to pick it up at the local bookstore. But it's just a great book. Well, very well done. I use iNaturalist a lot. I record. I was very slow to warm up to iNaturalist, but I use it a lot on all my plant ID hikes. I'll try to post everything that I see. What it'll do is if you upload a picture, it'll give you maybe the top few that it thinks you're talking about. It'll sometimes give you just 1 or 2, but sometimes it gives you 10. And it does help you narrow it down, but it may not completely ID what you've done. But if you wait a few days, somebody else may ID it for you or recommend an ID, especially if you have a decent picture. But if you upload because I'm president of Wildlands, I get emails from people that have these fuzzy pictures and have no idea what things are. But a good picture will usually do it. And take pictures of the flower, the leaf. If it's an aster species, the side view of the flower is important. So upload a few pictures. I've just started using the phone app Picture This, and it only gives you one option. It says it's this, and it may or may not be right. It's right more often than it's wrong, but again, it's a starting point to help you ID a plant. But I do like Picture This quite a bit. And I've already talked about the Native Plant Finder feature on the National Wildlife Federation. They say it's in beta testing, but I can tell you it's a lot better than it was a year ago. And I find it to be fairly useful now as far as finding those keystone plants. And if I'm thinking of putting a plant in, I can use it to check and see what is the trade-off. Am I just putting in a pretty plant that doesn't do much, or does it do a lot? And so it's good information.
Okay, then, and other web resources, I'll let you just talk about them.
Sure. The national website has some sample layouts for gardens. The closest one to here is Chattanooga, but if you want to see what a professional landscape designer would do, you can look at some of those. It's a good source of some information. For our organization here in Middle Tennessee is just 2.5 years old, but we do have a resources page if you want to look at plants that would attract birds in the winter to provide berries for them. Patty Gertner has an outstanding spreadsheet, it's a PDF file now, of recommended shrubby plants and small trees that would do great. The Tennessee Wildlands chapter has been around for almost 10 years. They're one of the largest chapters in the country with 240 members. And they have an outstanding resource page. There's a lot to it there. And Lisa Limsa's Go Native booklet is available there, and that's also good. And just anything on their resource page is good. They've done a great job. Especially the native plant bloom chart that Stephanie has on the right side of the page. As I mentioned, I think Middle Tennessee chapter is working on a similar one for our area, but there's not much difference to the one in Chattanooga. We're not that far apart. So what works for them almost always does well for us. And just glancing this over, and I don't see anything in there that I would not plant. So that's a great resource.
One other thing you had mentioned, I noticed some of the native plants were, they could be listed sort of generically, like a hibiscus is a great example. But sometimes a hibiscus can be native and sometimes they can be non-native. So you really have to look at the scientific name of the native version in order for you to pick up one that is considered native, correct?
Yeah, I would always want to know the scientific name of a plant. And that's especially important, for example, with milkweed. There's evidence that when people buy the non-native Mexican milkweed, it throws off the timing of the migration of the monarchs and various other things. Now, exactly what the definition of native is quite, well, varies person to person. But I like to use, it may not be native to Tennessee, but if it's native to an adjoining state, I might consider planting it. And if you remember that scarlet hibiscus that I showed you, there's no known native population of that scarlet hibiscus in Tennessee, but it's in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Arkansas, Missouri. And so I think that's good enough for me.
Right. Hey, we have a comment in the comments area from Ula. She said there is a movie on Hulu called The Biggest Little Farm that deals with creating biodiversity on a farm. And it's great. So great. Thanks so much, Ula, for that suggestion. Okay, and don't forget, before the end of this, before I close this Zoom session out, please copy all of the chat links. So you can probably just highlight the one that I just posted all of the deep dive links for, and just paste them into a Word document on your side so you have them. Okay. All right. So thank you so much. We're gonna now talk about the August 12th program, which is once again the second Thursday of the month. We have these programs every month, always the second Thursday of the month. We normally send out invitations through our newsletter. We post when these meetings or what the meeting is going to be about, not meeting, but program is going to be about on Facebook and Twitter and on Instagram. Okay. So next month, we're going to be remembering Mac Pritchard. Matt, and it's going to be presented by Randy Hedgepath, who is our current state naturalist. So Mac Pritchard was, well, let me just start. On March 31st, 2021, is now designated as the Mac Pritchard Day by the Governor Bill Lee, in appreciation and celebration for Pritchard's life and service. He was our first archaeologist, the state's first archaeologist, and later the first naturalist of the state of Tennessee. He started working for the state at age 16, and he continued to work for them for 50 years. And he, was one of those, I don't know, he had a fantastic career in the parks system. He helped create several state parks. He had created over 25 conservation groups, Tennessee Trail Association, the Scenic Rivers, Tennessee Citizens, Wilderness Planning, Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservatory, and the Tennessee Audubon Society, which is amazing. So, and he worked and fought for the creation of many nature sites and state parks. So please come and watch or join us for the August 12th program. It will be once again at 7 p.m. All right, so we have some closing thoughts for today, and it will be, it is being provided to us by our fearless leader, Antoinette Olison, our executive chairman. So here you go.
I've been asked to bring a quote that speaks to the subject of the talk of the program, and I found this one, and I was delighted that Richard used Doug Tellamy in a lot of what he was talking about. And this is a quote from him, and I thought it really just sums up everything that Richard and everyone has been talking about. And it says, he says, "All plants are not created equal, particularly in their ability to support wildlife. Most of our native plant eaters are not able to eat alien plants, and we are replacing native plants with alien species at an alarming rate, especially in the suburban gardens on which our wildlife increasingly depends. My central message is that unless we restore native plants to our suburban ecosystems, the future of biodiversity in the United States is dim." And that is from Bringing Nature Home, Doug Tellamy.
So thank you so much, everyone.